Want to know why? Ask how. Howard the Humongous.
If you, like me, are on the left, you know that Donald Trump is hiding big secrets. Secrets about his business dealings and secrets about his connection with the Russians. So this week, when Andrew McCabe, former deputy director of the FBI, hit the TV interview circuit, his revelations hit you with a deep sense of satisfaction. Why? Because McCabe's explosive exposés fueled your righteous indignation. It gave you a dopamine high, the high that comes from what neuroscientists and psychologists call altruistic punishment. McCabe's revelations substantiated your suspicions that Donald Trump is committing high crimes and misdemeanors. But there is a topsy-turvy, through the looking glass interpretation of everything that McCabe revealed. It's the interpretation on the right, and it might just surprise you. Remember, McCabe's big revelation this week was that the professionals at the FBI and the Justice Department suspected that Donald Trump might be a Russian asset. In fact, alarm bells at the FBI and the Justice Department were going off like crazy. Russian meddling alarms. The FBI and Justice Department had one piece of evidence after another that the Russians were penetrating our electoral system and possibly, just possibly, helping to shove one of the dupes that Russian intelligence calls useful idiots into, of all places, the White House. The evidence of Russian penetration and manipulation was so serious that Andrew McCabe met with the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein twice, and Rosenstein seriously offered to wear a bug in his meetings with Trump. He offered to wear a wire. McCabe and Rosenstein also discussed invoking the 25th Amendment, which says that if the Vice President and the President's cabinet members decide that the President can no longer handle the duties of office, they can eject him. They can toss him out of office. If you are on the left, where I am, you and I see this as a strong hint that the Russians were pulling the strings of the presidential election and dancing us like puppets. But that's not how the right sees McCabe's revelations. Not at all. According to the pro-Trump right, Hillary Clinton was puppeteering the Russians. Yes, that's right, Hillary was using the Russians to undermine Trump. Hillary, says the right, had two ways to get into the White House up her sleeve. One was to win the election, and the other was to use her operatives in the FBI and the Justice Department to produce a bloodless coup. A coup to illegally toss a duly elected president out of office. The poor, unfortunate victim of this conspiracy was Donald Trump. Yes, to the folks on the right, there is a deep state conspiracy to subvert the Constitution and to hit the button on Trump's ejection seat. When McCabe revealed his meeting with Rod Rosenstein, Rosenstein's offer to wear a wire, and the talk of invoking the 25th Amendment, it was proof positive of what the right has been claiming all along. There's a deep state conspiracy to get rid of poor, besieged Donald Trump. And Hillary Clinton has been pulling the strings. The evidence is all over right-wing websites like Breitbart and the Daily Caller. I'm going to take you on a deep dive into another right-wing source, Investors Business Daily. Yes, the words you are about to hear come directly from Investors Business Daily, a part of the right-wing media monolith. The Justice Department, writes Investors Business Daily, held meetings to consider removing President Trump from office under the 25th Amendment after Trump fired former FBI Director James Comey for lying. If that doesn't convince you there's a deep state, perhaps nothing will. The supposed Russia-Trump collusion was in fact engineered by the Obama administration and Hillary Clinton campaign working with the deep state officials and bureaucrats. And McCabe admits he began the obstruction of justice investigation against Trump despite having virtually no evidence, says Investors Business Daily. This, quote, culminated in the appointment of Robert Mueller as a special prosecutor. That ensured, according to Investors Business Daily, that no matter what happened to James Comey, Andrew McCabe, or any of the others, Trump's presidency would be hobbled from the very beginning by an unjustified investigation. This is nothing less than an attempted silent coup against a sitting president. Who all is involved in this plot, this silent coup against a sitting president? Let's return to the words of Investors Business Daily. Quote, presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, CIA Director John Brennan, current Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, Senior Justice Department official Bruce Orr, and his wife and sometime CIA asset Nellie Orr, FBI Director James Comey, FBI Attorney Lisa Page, FBI official Peter Strzok, and of course Andrew McCabe took part, says Investors Business Daily. Quote, they all worked together to undermine Trump using what they knew was an unreliable dossier based on hearsay from questionable foreign sources and paid for by Hillary Clinton and the Democratic National Committee. They lied about it, or kept quiet about it, or misrepresented what they did, even to the Foreign Intelligence Security Court. That, says Business Daily, is a real obstruction of justice and a real conspiracy. Who was behind this nefarious plot? The great hissing dragon lady of the right, Hillary Clinton, of course. And how did criminal Hillary pull the strings? Let's go back to the words of another article in Investors Business Daily. Quote, it's beginning to look as if claims of monstrous collusion between Russian officials and U.S. political operatives were true, but it wasn't Donald Trump who was guilty of Russian collusion. It was Hillary Clinton and U.S. intelligence officials who worked with Russians and others to entrap Trump. Investors Business Daily then dives into the controversial June 2016 Trump Tower meeting between Donald Trump Jr. and officials of then-candidate Donald Trump's campaign staff and a Russian lawyer known to have ties with high-level officials in Vladimir Putin's government. Quote, a growing body of evidence, says Investors Business Daily, indicates that the meeting may have been a setup, part of a broad effort to tarnish the Trump campaign involving Hillary Clinton operatives employed by Kremlin-linked figures and Department of Justice officials, close quote. As a former British spook in Moscow, Investors Business Daily explains, quote, Steele had extensive ties to Russia. That's why he was picked as the primary researcher. Steele's dossier, says Investors Business Daily, for which Fusion GPS reportedly received $1 million, was largely based on interviews, Investors Business Daily admits, quote, with Russian officials. And who paid that $1 million, says Investors Business Daily, as we and others have reported. It was Hillary Clinton's campaign and the Democratic National Committee, then under Hillary's control. The only real evidence of collusion, says Investors Business Daily, with Russians at all, points to Hillary Clinton. It was she who hired Steele to dig up dirt on Trump using Russian sources. The FBI and Justice Department used information from that 35-page document as the pretense for the FISA wiretap on Trump aide Carter Page. Far from being limited in scope, emphasizes Investors Business Daily, quote, those wiretaps, in essence, provided a backdoor key to the entire Trump campaign. They provide, quote, the basis for the Russian investigation. Adds Investors Business Daily, an earlier investigation by Real Clear Politics showed that as early as March 2016, the FBI, other Western intelligence sources, and Clinton campaign operatives contacted the Trump campaign about potentially damaging information about Clinton. Yes, this is hard to believe, but Investors Business Daily claims that potentially damaging information about Clinton was coming from Clinton campaign operatives. Meanwhile, Investors Business Daily claims that, quote, Natalia Veselnitskaya, the Putin-connected lawyer who contacted the Trump campaign about having dirt on Hillary Clinton, was a client of Fusion GPS. In other words, the company hired to do opposition research on Donald Trump by the Clinton campaign. Reports Investors Business Daily, Veselnitskaya, quote, was accompanied by a former Soviet military counterintelligence official, now working as a lobbyist, named Rinat Akhmetchin. GPS Glenn Simpson, says Investors Business Daily, quote, admits he had dinner with Veselnitskaya, both the night before and the night after the Trump Tower meeting. Back to Investors Business Daily, Veselnitskaya herself, it says, subsequently claimed that the talking points for her meeting with the Trump people were provided to her by Simpson. In short, claims Investors Business Daily, Clinton's minions, quote, were baiting a trap for the Trump campaign to make it appear as if they were colluding with Russian officials. Investors Business Daily calls this, quote, the scandal of the century. It was likely, claims Investors Business Daily, that information was handed directly from Russian propaganda arms to the Clinton campaign, fed into the top levels of the FBI and Department of Justice to open up a counterintelligence investigation into a political campaign that has now colluded with nearly every top official at the DOJ and FBI over the course of the last couple of years. Absolutely amazing. This is, again, Investors Business Daily, which says the only real collusion appears to be on the part of the Clinton campaign. Figures Investors Business Daily, quote, aided by the Obama administration, CIA Chief John Brennan, and a handful of high-level officials at the Department of Justice and FBI. Adds Investors Business Daily, quote, in comments made in a raucous rally in Indiana, Trump inveighed against the Mueller investigation's failure to look into Hillary Clinton. Said Trump, you can have the biggest story about Hillary Clinton. I mean, look at what she's getting away with. And let's see if she gets away with it. Trump told the crowd, concludes the Investors Business Daily, there should be, quote, jail time for those involved. That includes perhaps even Hillary Clinton, who sits at the political epicenter of all of this illegality. The same story appears all over the right-wing web, and it appears where it really counts the most. It appears on Fox TV. The peddlers of the deep state conspiracy story ignore the release of 27,000 emails from Clinton and from her campaign chairman, John Podesta. The leak of these emails was the result of a hack that the heads of America's 17 intelligence agencies all agree was made by Russia. The right-wing deep state conspiracy peddlers ignore the fact that many of the alleged pro-Hillary conspirators were lifelong Republicans. They ignore James Comey's appearance a few days before the election, reporting that the FBI was about to examine the contents of Anthony Weiner's computer. An utterly bizarre, totally out of the norm appearance that may have lost Hillary millions of votes and helped shove Donald Trump into office. The deep state conspiracy peddlers also ignore Trump's Miss Universe pageant in Moscow in 2013 and Trump's obsequious attempts back then to attract the attention of Vladimir Putin before that event. The deep state conspiracy peddlers also ignore Donald Trump's attempts to build a Trump Tower in Moscow and Trump's offer to provide a luxury apartment for Putin for free. The deep state conspiracy promoters ignore Trump's sniveling sycophancy when he's with Vladimir Putin. They ignore the changes in the Republican platform to favor Putin just before the election of 2016. They ignore the fact that Trump has handed Putin the biggest prize of his dreams, the virtual dissolution of NATO and of the Western Alliance. The deep space conspiracy promoters ignore Trump's attempt to remove $25 billion from actual security measures against the Russians and Russia's allies, the Chinese, and to focus that vast sum of money on a 2,000-mile-long border wall with, of all nations, Mexico. They ignore the evidence that when Donald Trump was about to be downed by 6 bankruptcies, money from Putin bailed him out, billions of dollars in money. They ignore what Investors Business Daily itself says about the Steele dossier, the dossier on the way that the Russians wooed Trump. Steele was, writes Investors Business Daily, a former British spook in Moscow with extensive ties to Russia. They ignore their own confession that Steele's dossier was largely based on interviews with Russian officials. They ignore the fact that whether he is conscious of it or not, Donald Trump is acting as what the Russians call a useful idiot. Whether he knows it or not, Donald Trump is a Russian asset. This is Howard the Humongous, speaking to you from the future. It's your job and my job to make. Or, want to know why? Ask how. And now for the sleazy, sneaky, slimy, insidious, traitorous, little off button. I think I've got it.